Indonesia has banned domestic workers from working in Saudi Arabia after a woman was beheaded by a sword. It's a case that reveals more on the plight of millions of workers in this region. What does it take to protect their rights, and who is to blame for their sufferings? This is Inside Story. Hello, a very warm welcome to the program. I'm Fuli Batibo. Indonesia has imposed a ban on all women wanting to work in Saudi Arabia. The move comes after 54-year-old Riyati Binti Sapubi was beheaded for allegedly murdering her abusive employer. Gerald Tan has more.
This group of Indonesians may well be among the last few headed for Saudi Arabia to work. For a while at least, the government has announced a temporary suspension of workers to the Gulf nation.
I have decided to apply a moratorium on sending Indonesian workers to Saudi Arabia to go into effect from August the 1st. But starting from today, steps towards this measure have begun.
The decision was a backlash to the beheading of this woman. 54-year-old Riyati Binti Sapubi was executed on Saturday after a court convicted her of murdering her employer. The Indonesian president said the death sentence broke the norms and manners of international relations.
I have filed a strong protest over the execution of Ms. Riyati because they should have informed Indonesia before executing her.
The case has prompted a national outcry over the protection of Indonesian workers overseas. More than 1.2 million Indonesian citizens are employed in Saudi Arabia, mostly as maids and construction workers. Rights groups have long pushed for better legislation to help prevent abuse and exploitation, an issue many workers themselves are willing to overlook.
I'm going to Saudi. Although there was the beheading incident, I'm not worried. I'm confident with my choice to go to Saudi Arabia.
A sign perhaps of the great lengths these individuals will go for any opportunity at all. Gerald Tan, Al Jazeera.
Well, to further discuss the plight of domestic workers in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere in the region, we're now joined by our guests from Beirut, Simel Essim, Senior Regional Technical Specialist on Gender Equality and Women's Workers' Rights for the International Labour Organization, and in Munich, Christoph Wilke, Senior Researcher at Human Rights Watch, specializing in Saudi Arabia and Jordan. Thank you both for being on the program today. Christoph, if I may start with you, I know that you're very familiar with this particular case. It's unfortunately not the first time that there are reports of abuse in this country. How widespread is this phenomenon in Saudi Arabia, and on what scale do these abuses occur?
Well, there are two issues here. One is the beheading, which is a tragedy, of course, and the other one is what abuse Ms. Sapubi may have suffered before she got into a dispute with her employer. And what Human Rights Watch found in research over the past 4 or 5 years is that there are numerous cases in which domestic workers from Indonesia, the Philippines, Sri Lanka and other nations are being abused in Saudi Arabia. The abuse ranges from smaller things that may have a big impact on workers' lives, such as non-payment of salary, to more physical abuse, forced confinement in the home, even food deprivation, and sometimes as well beatings, physical abuse and sexual abuse. In some cases, we determined that the abuses rose to the level of slavery-like conditions in Saudi Arabia.
And so how does the judiciary system work in Saudi Arabia exactly? Because tensions in the case of Ms. Riyati rose between Saudi Arabia and Indonesia because the Indonesians claimed that they weren't informed of her beheading. How does the judiciary system work exactly in cases like this?
Human Rights Watch opposes the death penalty unconditionally. It is not only a cruel and degrading punishment, but it is also a double tragedy because any mistakes that might have happened in the justice system are incorrigible. They cannot be rectified. What we have found in the Saudi justice system, that many mistakes indeed are being made. Some are systematic. Very few defendants, and certainly even fewer foreign workers who are defendants, have a lawyer. There is a question of being informed of the precise nature of the charges and the ability to present witnesses in defense. And then there's a bigger problem, which is that Saudi Arabia does not have a written criminal law. So the criminal, and there's no system of precedence either. So a crime is pretty much what the judge determines it to be.
So
now, we all understand murder.
Right. I was just going to ask you, just to clarify, in the case of Ms. Riati, she did admit to killing her employer, but did the Saudi courts take into account the fact that she said that she was abused, that she was acting in self-defense?
Indeed, these are two open questions. Let me go back to the first one. Was it murder? I wouldn't put too much store in a confession. I have seen confessions that were patently coerced or patently made up in the Saudi justice system. So let's leave aside the matter whether or not she has confessed. A woman is dead, and the indication is that Ms. Sapoubi killed her. But was it premeditated murder? Now, according to the unwritten understanding of Sharia law, Islamic law in Saudi Arabia, only premeditated murder merits the death penalty, not so al-qatl bil-khata, or killing somebody by mistake, or unpremeditated murder, manslaughter. Now, if she had had a good defense lawyer, if there had been a good criminal law written down, a defense lawyer may have made the case that she acted in a fit of rage, that this was not something she had planned. She was, because she had been abused before, the argument is that she wasn't allowed to go home, that this escalated. No doubt, a woman is killed, a Saudi woman, there should be a form of punishment. But was it premeditated murder? We don't know. I doubt it. I hesitate to say.
Okay, well, let me bring in Simel Essiem now in Beirut. Simel, are there any structures or laws that protect these foreign domestic workers in countries like Saudi Arabia, for instance? Is there a law that protects these women?
Domestic workers are the largest group of workers excluded from labor legislation and the right to organize around the world. Recently, on June 16th, actually, in Geneva, an international convention promoting decent work for domestic workers was adopted by a majority. And the countries of the region, including Saudi Arabia, have voted for the adoption of this convention. Now is the step to end the exclusion of domestic workers from their labor laws, from their social security laws, and ensure that the workers have standard, unified contracts, know the terms of their contracts. Saudi Arabia's 2006 labor code clearly excludes domestic workers.
So you're saying that the system in these countries is clearly against these foreign domestic workers?
There is legal inclusion and very little regulatory mechanisms that would ensure that their labor rights are respected as any other group of workers. Yes.
But are there any agreements, if any, between the host countries and the countries of origin of these domestic workers? Is there an agreement, for instance, between Indonesia and Saudi Arabia on how these people who go there should be treated?
Bilateral agreements are very important, and I would like to make a point about the ban, because Indonesia and many countries of origin have at different times put these bans into effect. Indonesia had one for Malaysia, Philippines has one for Lebanon, but these bans on their own are not really effective, because there are still as many as 300 Filipino domestic workers, Filipino women leaving their country for the Middle East to work, majority of them as domestic workers. So a very important aspect of this puzzle is the regulation and monitoring of private employment agencies, both in the countries of origin and also in the destination countries, making sure abusive practices of these employment agencies are curtailed. Those who are abusers are closed down, their permits taken away. Labor inspectors going to these agencies to inspect them. And we do need, I mean, in the cases cases of workers' access to justice. We need social workers that can help resolve labor disputes. And the workers should have the opportunity, right, to change their employers. And we need to think even beyond this legal inclusion and enforcement, but how is this individual sponsorship system working or not working, protecting or not protecting?
We'll get to the sponsorship system in just a minute because I want to discuss that further. Christoph, I just want to ask you about a point that Simel just made there in Beirut. She said that the ban is not effective. A ban is not effective. Indeed, Indonesia had a ban on Malaysia, which was lifted recently in 2009. It was lifted just recently. Are these bans banning domestic workers from going to work in Indonesia or Saudi Arabia, rather, or Malaysia, are they effective in your opinion?
Well, we could add other bans of the Philippines to Jordan, Indonesia to Jordan, etc. And I agree they have not been particularly effective. The reason is the following, that once a ban comes into effect, the recruitment agencies in the sending country, let's take Indonesia, and in the host country, let's take Saudi Arabia, start to cooperate in ways to circumvent the government. So, for example, a worker will be flown out as a tourist to Dubai and then from Dubai to Jordan or Saudi Arabia. And she is not registered with the government in any form. So the government doesn't even know of her presence in the country, has no information, as it should have under regular government channels, of the name of the employer, the number of her residency permit, and such things that may become important when there is a dispute. So these bans have not been effective in helping domestic workers, protecting their rights. They have led to informal migration, which puts domestic workers at even greater risks. But they are, of course, understandable from a political point of view and the pressure that is being put on the sending governments after a case like the one in Saudi Arabia. But I think I agree that the proper response is twofold. One, better regulation by Indonesia of its own private recruitment agencies to make sure they abide by Indonesian law and keep within the proper channels. But also another point that hasn't been mentioned now, in order to apply pressure on Saudi Arabia and other countries in the Gulf who receive domestic workers, we need a coalition of sending countries. Sure. What has happened over the past couple of years is that one country is playing off the other country. So now Saudi Arabia may be looking to import and to get domestic workers from Cambodia, from Vietnam, countries that have even less developed regulatory frameworks for this kind of work. Only if we see the kind of thing we saw in Dakar a short while ago, where all sending countries get together and try to apply pressure, will we see change.
Christoph, I may be wrong about this, but why does it seem that Indonesian workers are more vulnerable than, let's say, the Filipinos or Malaysia, for instance? Because, again, it's not the first time that we've heard cases of abuse involving Indonesian workers. Is it due to a lack of education, perhaps, or a lack of proper support from their country?
I personally do not have information that particular nationalities are vulnerable of those that are currently in Saudi Arabia. There is a difference to some degree between levels of education, knowledge about rights, between some that are more educated and others that come from less educated areas. But the bigger difference may be the degree to which the local embassy is prepared to support them. Both support them with social workers, case workers, as Siem has said, but also maybe to go to the media and to make cases public. There are some sending countries that are extremely reluctant to do that, and others like Indonesia, but also perhaps the Philippines, that are more ready to do so.
Ms. Mel, I see you nodding there. You seem to agree with that point that Christoph just made.
Yes, I think, the labor attaches clearly also in these diplomatic missions of countries of origin are important. NGOs that are there in the countries of destination that are not just there with shelters or legal aid for mitigating, crisis, but there for also preventive purposes, for workers' education, workers' own organizations, not just support institutions, but workers' their own organizations, and trade unions, both in the countries of origin and the destination countries, need to take up the rights of domestic workers as workers. They should not be treated as victims or aliens. I mean, in the Gulf countries, domestic workers are not even under the purview of ministries of labor as workers. They are under the alien departments of ministries of interior. They're not aliens. They're there to respond to household needs.
But do you think it's a cultural issue, perhaps, in the Gulf countries? Is it cultural that they're treated this way?
Cultural, they see what this way? I'm sorry.
I was saying you were mentioning the fact that they're treated like aliens in these Gulf countries, and many of them are considered. We don't want to generalize, of course, but they're seen as slaves. Is it cultural? Is it a cultural question, a cultural issue?
I think the regulatory framework is a very important one. You will have bad employers anywhere in the world.
Sure.
But the fact that you have domestic workers inside the home, which is not open to labor inspections, makes these workers vulnerable. The fact that they are living in these households make that 24/7 at the beck and call of their employers, which exposes them to abuse and exploitation without knowledge of where to turn to, who to go to when they are facing problems. Long hours, no break, passports being taken,
sure,
lack of freedom of movement. So I think it is more about regulation than culture.
Okay. Well, let's broaden out the discussion a bit. Let's take a look at the wider picture in the region. And the Gulf employs many foreign workers. Let's take a look at some of the numbers we have here for you. In the UAE and Qatar, for instance, migrants make up well over 80% of the total population. In Kuwait, it's roughly 66%. In Bahrain, foreign workers constitute roughly 50% of a population of around 1 million. In Saudi Arabia, it's roughly 31%, while in Oman, an estimated 25% are foreign workers. Now, for foreign workers in the Gulf, life is dictated by the Kafala system or sponsorship. However, Bahrain is in the process of abandoning it. In the Kafala system, residence visas are tied to specific sponsors, usually the employers. Changing jobs is exceedingly difficult, and most Gulf governments have a zero-tolerance policy towards unions and workers' strikes. Now, Christoph Wilke, do you think the sponsorship system has contributed to the abusive conditions experienced by some foreign domestic workers?
There's no doubt about that. Let's mention in the beginning, though, that other countries also employ the sponsorship system for certain types of employment, including Western countries like the United States. But if you break it down, what the sponsorship system means in the Middle East countries, especially the Gulf countries, it means no freedom of movement. There are two types. One is the type like Saudi Arabia, where you actually need your sponsor, who is supposed to be your employer, to sign a piece of paper so that you can leave the country. You have a clear right in international law to leave any country, and this is a violation of that right. In other countries like Jordan, it works with a system of fines. A foreigner who overstays his or her residency permit has to pay fines in order to leave that country. Domestic workers make very little money, send all of that money home, and have no means to pay those fines when they're not responsible for that. Besides freedom of movement, the Kafala system, sponsorship system, means that you cannot change your employer.
Sure.
So you come on a contract, and if something goes wrong during that contract, you have to go home. And sometimes the employer will not pay for your ticket home. Sometimes you want to stay and make more money because you incur debts, but you cannot change your employer.
But the argument,
so those are the two main elements of the Kafala system.
Well, the argument, Christoph, for maintaining the sponsorship system is that, these countries have such high proportion of foreign workers, as we just saw, that there needs to be some way of controlling them, these countries say. Can these countries, such as Saudi Arabia or Qatar, can they operate without the sponsorship system, given the high number of foreign workers among their population?
I've never quite understood this need for control because nobody's been able to adequately explain it to me, and we've listened very patiently to the head of immigration services in Kuwait or other high officials in the immigration and interior ministries in Jordan, Saudi Arabia and Lebanon to explain the need for this system to us. The need for control means perhaps that the government wants to know where you are, the government wants to know who you work for, and that there's a reasonable chance of you going home. Now, the current system, which puts so many obstacles in the way of the workers, and the current system especially fails when there is a dispute between the worker and the employer. This system has actually opened the doors to lots and lots of undocumented workers being in the country. There are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of undocumented workers, including domestic workers, in each of the countries we're speaking about, because there was a dispute between the employer and the employee. They went and worked in the informal market and have stayed there but are now unable to leave. So this need for control has certainly not increased the control that they have.
Okay, Simel, let me put the same question to you. What's your view on this sponsorship system? Do you think that these countries, such as Saudi Arabia, can operate without this system? They say they need it because they need to control, once again, their foreign workers. But is this really the case?
I think they can. I mean, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia have been considering proposals to transfer sponsorship of domestic workers away from individual employers to public-private recruitment agency, one agency in the case of Kuwait, and 3-4 large agencies in Saudi Arabia. However, we need the political will and we need the pressure, both internal and external, to bring this to realization. And the ILO is, as International Labour Organization, prepared to support the governments and social partners in these countries to realize that. Bahrain may have announced the end to the Kafala system, but it's a very partial, actually, end. It is, and it is still not inclusive of domestic workers. We really need to think outside the box, and I think the international convention, the Decent Work for Domestic Workers Convention, is inspiring in that sense. Why not think about an end to live-in arrangement? Why can't the workers, domestic workers, live in separate housing? They finish their work and then they go live in housing where they can cook their own food, speak their own language, have access to training, have access to social community services, activities, etc., that can make their lives more fulfilled and as workers, as human beings. Okay. I think both the sending countries and the countries of destination and all the related institutions, we owe it to this large group of women workers, majority women workers around the world.
Yes, so
to
you say
have the same benefits as other workers.
You say the blame shouldn't just be laid on the host country, but also the home country where these foreign workers are coming from. Christoph, I'll put the last question to you. Just what does it take to protect the rights of these foreign workers?
We've talked largely about labor rights, and I agree that the recent ILO convention is a great step forward. I would urge Saudi Arabia and the other states to quickly ratify and implement it. A key implementation is to include domestic workers under labor rights, so they have the same regulation of working hours, annual leave, sick leave, maternity leave, those kind of things as other workers. And the other one is to really reform the sponsorship system so that they have more freedom of movement and are able to leave the country when they go home. The other issue to protect the workers is to really reform the criminal justice system, which is where we started this conversation about the execution of Mr. Ruyati. And here there has to be also a change in thinking that there are crimes taking place inside the home, that there needs to be inspection and investigation. the police departments need to speak the local languages of domestic workers to be able to hear their complaints via phone numbers. They could call in when there is a problem so that it doesn't escalate to the level it has here.
Okay, thank you both for joining us for a very interesting discussion. Christoph Wilkes, Senior Researcher at Human Rights Watch, and Simel Essim, Senior Regional Technical Specialist at the International Labour Organization. Thank you both for your time. And thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at our usual address, insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching.